thank you all for introducing yourselves. It was really nice to meet you. I'm going to share my screen and move into the presentation. Let's see. Select the tab. Do I have the right? Well, I'm going to go for this. Let's see. Share. And can folks see my screen?
Yes.
Great. And I tend not to go into presentation mode because I like to be able to see the slide that's coming up next. But I'll walk through this presentation, and then if there's some time at the end, I'm happy to take any questions that there might be. I always like to start by saying you're going to get my perspective of the history of crypto art. I have been here since 2017, and I was lucky enough to meet a lot of the people that were sort of in person that were, that helped start the entire movement. But of course, there's going to be other people with different perspectives that are going to have other, other stories to tell and other gaps that they can fill in the history. So I always encourage folks to talk to other folks that were around in the early days, and to try to get a balanced perspective. And of course, my view will be biased, and it comes from sort of my experiences. So with that out of the way, who am I? So a lot of folks know me as Artnome. Like I said, I've been in the space since 2017. I grew up in a family of engineers, so I've been, older brother's an engineer, younger brother's an engineer, dad's an engineer, but I was always lousy at science and math and really only ever wanted to be an artist since I was a little kid. Some people want to be baseball players or, firemen or whatever, but I just always wanted to be a painter or an artist. So I went on and studied art history and studio art in the late 90s and found that I couldn't get a job as an artist, which is a pretty common story and it becomes important later, and ended up going into tech myself. Spent 20 years mostly in startups in Boston, AI startups and data analytics. But ultimately was always in search of trying to figure out a way to blend my interest and passion for art with sort of my birthright and daily jobs that were in tech. My background in relevance to NFTs at a high level, I'm now the CEO of a company, co-founder and CEO of a company called Club NFT that is designed to help collectors back up their NFTs. A lot of people don't realize, and we'll get into this, that it's very rare that the artwork itself, the image or video, is actually on chain. Usually it's off chain, and there's, like with anything that you collect, there's some effort and work into that needs to be put into preserving NFTs. So we've built tools to help collectors do that for free as of the last year and a half or so. Also, my company, Club NFT, is the sponsor behind rightclicksave.com. So when NFTs started to take off, one of the things that frustrated me was people from the traditional art world were saying, well, this isn't real art. These aren't real artists. This is just like a scam, or it's all just about speculation. And I thought there was really a need for a publication that would treat the artists in this space and the collectors, to be quite frank, with the same level of respect that traditional art magazines do. So I encourage you all to go to rightclicksave.com and enjoy the content that we put up there. Prior to those, I ran an art and tech blog called Artnome.com that goes back to, I think, 2015 or 16. And that's where I wrote about sort of the earliest descriptions of what crypto art is and could be, and sort of early definitions of what NFTs could be before we were even calling them NFTs. We'll get into that a little bit. And then lastly, I ran an initiative called the Green NFTs Initiative. So when NFTs sort of took off, and again, we'll talk about this a bit more, there was a point in time where there was a lot of backlash around the impact on the environment. And rather than just have people fight with each other, my goal was to start this initiative to sort of raise awareness and funding to work together to try to actually improve the efficiency and awareness around NFTs and their impact on the environment. So that's sort of a quick high level of my background. I like to start with like the super basics and not assume that anybody knows much of anything yet. That way, no one feels left out. And I also like to share art on all my slides. So this is What Now by crypto artist Sarah Zucker. But yeah, what is an NFT? So NFT obviously stands for non-fungible token, but fungible is kind of a tricky word. Not everybody knows what fungible means. And the way I like to describe it is if I had a dollar bill and you had a dollar bill, you'd probably be okay with me trading my dollar bill for your dollar bill. So that's called fungibility, right? You know, there's no difference between the dollar bill I have and the one you have. But if you have a Picasso painting and I have my niece's crayon drawing, and I said, well, they're both art, let's just change it, right? You would say, well, my Picasso, painting is worth much more than your niece's crayon drawing, although maybe some people would be happy to have the crayon drawing. So those things are not interchangeable, they're non-fungible, right? So something like Bitcoin could be considered like a fungible token. Non-fungible token is to show that, each of these tokens is sort of unique. And there, of course, is no actual token. It's not a physical token. A lot of people think of like a coin or something like that. It's digital. It's essentially code that resides on the blockchain. In the early days, what got us excited as creatives is that with something like Bitcoin, where you could prove out digital scarcity and mathematically prove that there are only ever so many tokens that were ever created, we started thinking, hey, maybe we can apply this to digital art too, because one of the reasons people don't seem to care about or collect digital art is because they feel like, well, if I can just see it for free and it's sort of infinitely available, why would I pay for that, right? So part of the early experiment was around this idea of transferring concepts of digital scarcity over to digital art. Other things that were appealing, there's sort of this idea of an immutable provenance. Because the blockchain is a distributed system or a distributed ledger list, it makes it so that when someone buys something and then, from the artist, and then later maybe it moves to secondary market, it's hard, if not impossible, for someone to go back and alter or forge that provenance or that chain of ownership based on the technology. And then, of course, smart contracts and royalties, we'll get into later, was sort of part of the appeal. But it's important to point out, I think, because, since, let's call it 2021, when sort of the NFT explosion hit, it's become fairly commercial. A lot of people don't really remember or realize that a lot of the principles of crypto art really do come from the crypto community and from cryptocurrency. So Bitcoin, the Genesis block for Bitcoin actually comes out in 2009. And for folks that don't know, Bitcoin is a decentralized digital currency. And some of these principles back then, this is like shortly after the 2007, 2008, monetary collapse and housing collapse and all of that other stuff. People weren't really trusting these government authorities and these centralized authorities that we were always told were there to protect us. So they wanted a peer-to-peer system where all they had to do is, trust themselves and be able to work, with each other. So I won't go too far into Bitcoin, but it's started by Satoshi Nakamoto, who's sort of this person, no one knows who he actually is. And it's sort of an amazing system, and it sets, culturally, it sort of sets the groundwork for the early crypto art movement. So, as with a lot of technology, pretty early on, there are people experimenting with the blockchain, trying to figure out how to do sort of creative art-related things with it. This is a 2011 ASCII art piece where someone, or Dan Kaminsky, not someone, made this tribute work to Len Sassaman, who's an early cryptographer. And you can see people are trying to figure out ways to get art onto the blockchain, very, very early on. But the blockchain, it turns out, is actually not great for storing large files. It's actually really, really expensive and cost prohibitive most of the time. So it turns out, even today, less than 10% of NFTs are actually fully stored onto the blockchain. But it's those challenges and sort of restrictions that become sort of part of the fun for a lot of the early crypto artists. Like, how can we use this new technology and work within the constraints? So I'm not a person who gets super obsessed about like who the absolute first person was to invent NFTs or to make an NFT. I call that firstism. I think people worry about it too much. There's sort of an ongoing battle about who came first and which was the exact first NFT. My perspective is that, as with many inventions or sort of art movements or evolutions, it's a lot of people sort of coming at it from different angles roughly around the same time. So 2014 is kind of an important year in the evolution of NFTs and crypto art, in that you have Kevin McCoy and Anil Dash, who do monograph.com, and they put out what a lot of people consider to be the first NFT token. I would sort of refer to it as almost like a proto NFT. But they, it does get demoed in front of folks in the traditional art world, and it gets some attention. But it's really, as you'll see with a lot of these earlier examples, it's a single artist or a small team of artists sort of exploring the potential, and it's not until later that we really get this idea where things catch on, that communities start to believe that these things are worth protecting, buying, selling, trading, at scale. But certainly an important early example. Another example, Rhea Myers, who's still very active as an artist, kind of comes at it from the contract side, and uses sort of conceptual art as their background, and says, the contract itself is art, right? So this work called This Contract is Art from 2004 actually poses that the contract itself is art. And we owe Rhea a lot for the evolution of NFTs. She's worked, pretty consistently in the space, from 2014 and prior all the way up to now. So a very important artist. If you're not familiar with her, I strongly encourage you to get to know her work, and definitely there very early on. And I'm conscious that in art history for so long, certainly when I learned art history in the 90s, unfortunately women were largely left out of the story. So I'm, going to demand that doesn't happen this time around, because women are so important to the sort of early evolution of NFTs. So someone who often, I think, doesn't get the credit they deserve, Nili Lerner, in 2014, she's creating also sort of like a proto NFT, and makes the argument that money can change your life, but you can change what money is. So she's sort of exploring brands and currency, and again, sort of more on the conceptual side of conceptual art. And what's interesting is she's in sort of Bitcoin forums where the people that understand the blockchain the most are all hanging out, and she's trying to explain pretty much exactly what NFTs are. And a lot of sort of the bro culture folks are trying to kick her off the forum in 2014 because they don't understand what she's describing, right? Which of course later on becomes essentially to be the core of what we now know as NFTs, right? And have become very, very popular. So a lot of early pioneers in 2014. 2015, Sarah Mayohas with Bitcoin. So she asks, what would happen if you were to invest in the artist instead of the art itself? So this sort of is like a premonition to the effect of NFTs sort of commodifying art, right? So she's saying, like, what if in investing and buying and collecting individual artworks, if you were to actually invest almost like in a company or stock into the artist. So if you buy Bitcoin, you'll get like a certain amount or percentage of her works moving forward. And in this way, sort of philosophically, she sort of is years ahead of sometimes what people might describe as a bit of the dark side, sort of the monetization of art through NFTs. Although I've never been shy, nor were a lot of the people early in the crypto art movement, to sort of defend that if artists don't start talking publicly about money and art and how they overlap, then they'll just continue to get screwed, right? So that does become part of the early dialogue or conversation in the crypto art movement. So what's interesting is, up to this point, I'm describing sort of individual artists, several of whom have traditional art training, Some who have, had already shown, in museums or galleries, right? But when we hit 2016, there's this big important change that happens. So the Rare Pepe wallet is released, and my argument is that the artist that I was sort of describing earlier almost kind of predate crypto art by my definition, right? So I argue that crypto art starts with these platforms like Rare Pepe Wallet, and the reason is that Rare Pepe Wallet as a platform says anyone who wants to participate can participate, right? We're not interested in actually curating or judging how good your art is. So Rare Pepe Wallet started by my good friend Joe Looney, and he says, look, I'm not here to judge how good or bad your art is and to say who can or can't participate. And they also say that we're not going to take a fee, right? So for all the work that they put into building what essentially is the very first NFT platform, almost every single NFT platform that you know of today, OpenSea, Rarible, Super Rare, Foundation, they all sort of owe a debt to Rare Pepe Wallet, because prior to Rare Pepe Wallet, there is no concept of people buying token-based, digital art in large numbers, and this idea of having no curation, where everybody can participate, and this idea that artists deserve more, in this case 100% of primary and secondary royalties. A lot of that, most of it really, kind of comes from this community, along with the idea that anyone would even, it's really the first proof, while other artists are playing around and making art and exploring the blockchain, Rare Pepe Wallet actually shows that hundreds of thousands of dollars are being exchanged with people that are competing with each other to buy art by people that don't necessarily have traditional art background, right? So what is crypto art? Crypto art is when you create a system where everyone gets to participate, like hands down, full stop, right? And that system starts with some of these early platforms like Rare Pepe Wallet. Always do the side note. At some point, Rare Pepe became known as being sort of a hate symbol in the U.S., and I always want to be sensitive to that fact. But Rare Pepe Wallet and sort of the creative movement around memes and, this idea of a meme economy predates the usage of Pepe as a hate symbol, and is still used by, creatives and artists around the world who have no interest in using it as a way to spread hate. Another early important platform, so the Rare Pepe wallet coming out in 2016 is Bitcoin based, so it uses something called Counterparty. But in 2017, Curio Cards is launched by Travis Uhrig, who is sort of active in leading the San Francisco Bitcoin meetup for many years. And similar to Rare Pepe wallet, Travis is saying, all artists welcome. I want everyone, anyone, regardless of skill or background, everybody can participate. And once again, is saying we're not going to take any fee. So, you might think if you came in 2021, you're like, well, how the heck did we end up with like all of these for-fee marketplaces? Well, these early platforms are largely being created, platforms or marketplaces are largely being created by people who are diehard, Bitcoin and cryptocurrency enthusiasts, and they kind of hate the idea of any middleman operating that would take a cut, right? The whole goal of Bitcoin was like, let's cut out the banks and the credit cards and like just build systems that work on their own where people can kind of transact peer to peer. So that really was the heart and soul and driver of early crypto art platforms. They were inspired deeply by the sort of zeitgeist of cryptocurrency. So this is sort of the first NFT platform on Ethereum. Shortly after, CryptoPunks comes out. People now know CryptoPunks as like these $1 million status symbols that rich and famous people use, or people that got in early use on their Twitter profile. It was actually a super revolutionary digital generative art project back then. When it was first released by John and Matt, who are good friends of mine, initially, not all the all the punks actually got claimed all that fast, right? And some people were able to claim a whole bunch of them, and people didn't really understand what NFTs were or why they would want these things for the most part. And it was really only over time, right, that they've sort of become status symbols and, are now bought and sold for as much as, millions of dollars. In a way, it's kind of sad because I feel like people have a hard time looking at them with fresh eyes, but there was no such thing as sort of a PFP art project or art movement, prior to CryptoPunks. And I think things like Bored Apes and all these other things have sort of diluted the importance and historical significance of what Matt and John did, really pioneering NFT projects on this scale, and the idea of giving away these pieces, and that they sort of grew over time, and the interesting approach to tokenomics. So encourage folks to kind of go back and look at CryptoPunks with fresh eyes. A lot of times people ask me, do you consider CryptoPunks, crypto art, or they do like crypto collectibles? And for me, they land squarely in the art side, regardless of how sort of the cultural world has taken them over. Another super important project that's sort of at the heart and soul of crypto art is Dada NYC. So Bea Ramos, Judy Mam, and Abraham Milano, well before 2017, had created a global drawing platform where thousands and thousands of artists from all around the world, different countries all around the world, would sign in and create a drawing and then respond to each other's drawings and extend each other's drawings. And that way, language was not a barrier, right? Because we can all speak through the process of drawing. And they had these, really important principles baked into their drawing platform about how it didn't matter if you had lots of training or a traditional background. Like, everybody should create art, and everybody can communicate through art. And it's not so much the buying and selling and about art that matters. It's this ability for us to sort of understand the world around us and to share our understanding with each other. So they had this giant global group of artists, communicating together just for the love of art, but they wanted to find a way to be able to help get some of them paid for their work, so they could spend more time making art and less time doing, the other things that maybe were boring or not as, exciting for all these creative people. But they wanted to do it in a fair and equitable way. So they looked at Ethereum and launched a token in 2017, inspired by these ideas of sort of like universal basic income, where if one artist was selling for a lot, they would take the money and redistribute it across all the artists to try to avoid perverse incentives. So they've continued, to this day, to develop their ideas on, how can we develop an artist economy that's not perverse, and that actually supports and helps, people of all different ability levels. And I think their work's probably more important now than ever, because we're starting to see that it's harder to get sales in NFTs, and we're in a bear market, and it probably is time to reevaluate whether or not NFTs have really delivered on the promise in terms of being able to help artists make a living. 2018, one that people forget about sometimes now, Rare Art Labs. They were arguably the first commercial NFT platform. So they actually, if I remember correctly, took some funding and had professional designers. Like, some of these other platforms were a little bit wonky and didn't always work, the way you would expect, and were kind of hard to use sometimes. But Rare actually tries to launch a proper business out of it. And Rare Art Labs and Dada NYC and Joe and Matt and John from CryptoPunks all become important to sort of helping launch the early crypto art movement and the first Rare Art Festival, which we'll get to in a little bit here. So this is around the time when I come in. So I have a background in art and tech, and I had been writing about AI and art through 2015, 2016, and into 2017. And a friend of mine, Ahmed Hosni, who sort of wrote an artificial intelligence program for predicting the value of art at auction, told me, well, you should look at the blockchain, because Jason, your background in building this large database where you care about like the provenance of art and art history and how you want all your digital artist friends to be able to find a way to actually make a living, all of these things could be solved by the blockchain. And I thought, well, yeah, I don't think you understand. I'm into art. I'm not really into money or crypto. Like, that's a different kind of nerd. I don't think that's a thing that's going to appeal to me. But he said, no, please, definitely take some time and look at it. So I took half a day and I wrote an article in 2017 called The Blockchain Art Market is Here. I wrote it only after about 4 hours of research and buying and exploring, some of these early platforms. But it was because it became immediately obvious to me that all of these things that the blockchain, does well, grafted on really well to a lot of problems that I had already been trying to solve in the art space. So I wrote about sort of 4 key tenets in 2017 where I thought that the blockchain could really help artists. And again, this is before we're using the term NFT or non-fungible tokens. So we tended to call it blockchain art, or crypto art for that matter. So we thought that blockchain could help drive digital art sales through digital scarcity. And again, these are sort of assumptions back then. You have examples like maybe Rare Pepe and stuff, but not anything near what we have today. So it was really sort of visionary to assume that an entire global market could be built on digital scarcity for digital art, and it sort of obviously turned out to be true. Democratizing fine art investment. So my thinking back then was everyone was really obsessed with this idea with Bitcoin that you could divide it up sort of infinitely into fractional shares. So we thought, well, not everyone can afford, like a Picasso painting, but maybe through fractional ownership, we could sort of make traditional art more affordable because, again, most people don't have a huge budget to go and collect art. I've sort of abandoned this one along the way. Lots of companies tried to do it, but the problem is if you take, a famous or culturally important painting and you divide it into 1 million owners, generally what happens is it becomes an asset and it ends up in sort of like a storage facility, and it kind of ceases to serve its purpose as art. So I'm less interested in that aspect these days. And then improving provenance and reducing art forgery. So again, the blockchain is phenomenal at sort of tracking when people purchase something or if it changes hands. It makes it very hard for people to change sort of that history. And then creating a more ethical way of paying artists. So the traditional art world, taking 50% was pretty common for galleries. And again, with a nod towards sort of the traditional cryptocurrency world, like we wanted to explore, was there a way that we could write programs to automate a lot of this to get more of the money into artists' hands? And sort of an extension of that was looking at also how to automate secondary royalties. So because I had had a blog about art and technology for several years, I had really good SEO, and I wrote this article late 2017, went to bed, didn't think much of it, woke up the next day, and I had literally like 100 emails from people all around the world saying, wow, like, you're the expert on crypto art and blockchain art, and we would like to fly you to Bahrain or to London, to Christie's to present. And it kind of blew my mind because I was like, well, I've only done 3 hours worth of research and written one article. So I either have to tell these people I don't know what I'm talking about, or I can accept and, I can go and try to learn from the folks that got here before me and become a part of the community. So I kind of took the latter approach. And I was lucky that in early 2018, Rare AF1, which is arguably where crypto art was born, all these people were, dabbling in their own silos or creatively trying to figure out ways to use the blockchain. But in early 2018 in New York City, everyone from these different pockets or subcultures from around the world came together. Most importantly, Matt and John from CryptoPunks, and Judy and Bea from Data NYC, and Joe Looney, the creator of Rare Pepe Wallet. And we realized, those of us that were lucky enough to be there that day, You know, I think we went expecting like a small meetup with just like a handful of nerds, but it was like standing room only, and like you just had this sense in the air that like, oh, an entirely new art movement is being born with like new principles that are shared, even though we all have some areas where we're different and different goals and objectives. Like this is truly like a new movement. So that's when I wrote my second big article about the space. I wrote arguably the first attempt at trying to describe what the crypto art movement was, right? We have all these different people from around the world. Are there some sort of organizing principles that could define what crypto art is? So I won't read the whole thing. You can find the article, but at a high level, I came away with sort of 10 key principles. So crypto art is digitally native, so art that's made digitally first. Geographically agnostic, so people from all around the world are participating. Democratic and permissionless. You don't need to go kiss butt or have the right connections or get permission from a gallerist or a museum. Everybody gets to participate. Decentralized, so it's intentionally sort of tools and guidelines are designed to reduce the power of gatekeepers and middlemen. So unlike the traditional art world where so much of the power is focused in one area, the goal, at least early on with crypto art, was to keep it fully decentralized. Anonymous, so people often chose to use fake names or pseudonyms, often to protect themselves if they were making artwork that was sort of went against their country or their government. Mimetic, a lot of it was based on memes and spreading memes and memes from cryptocurrency. Self-referential, so again, a lot of the early crypto art talked about sort of crypto art history or events that happened in cryptocurrency, the cryptocurrency world, or about blockchain. Crypto patrons, so you know, a lot of what drove this early on, there were people that became very wealthy off of cryptocurrency, and they were interested in trying to support and build a culture around cryptocurrency. So they were supporting the early crypto artists and funding the early crypto artists. Pro-artist, so this idea that artists should get all, you know, certainly more or a better percentage of the sale, and in the early days, all of the percentage of the sale, and that, you know, we should do a better job of paying and taking care of our artists. And then dankness, which is one I sort of invented at the end, and this is the premise that if crypto art is going to be open to everybody, and that's literally my definition and many of the early people's definition, crypto art is what happens when you make art available to everybody. So if it's going to be available to everyone and everyone's an artist, we have to stop judging it in terms of who has the most classical training. So how do you judge it? You know, we judge it by dankness. So how expressive is it? Anyone can be expressive. You don't have to spend half your life in art school like I did to be expressive. Anybody can be expressive. So then shortly after that, wrote an article called Blockchain Artists Wanted, and I keep this in here so that people can understand just how much things have changed. So in early 2018, there were actually more crypto art platforms than there were artists. They would come to me, the platforms, and say, hey, we've built this platform, but we actually don't know any artists. And we struggled to try to get any artists onto the early platforms because they were like, I don't know if we really like this, or we don't really understand it, or it seems kind of technical or whatever. So I wrote this article because I made, in 5 minutes, I made this GIF, this Pepe GIF. I threw it up onto Rare Pepe wallet, and I just assumed no one was going to care and no one knew who I was. And I came back a week later and I had sold $800 worth, which was more than I had sold in terms of paintings and sculpture and digital artwork in an entire 40-year career. I made more off of this 5-minute GIF, right? Because there were all these people that were excited about supporting artists and just exploring this new way of building sort of a new art world. So it moves from sort of experimental platforms into commercial platforms. One of the best ones early on is Super Rare. They really nail down the user experience and make it really easy for folks to understand, you know, how to get in and create a wallet and connect. And I was lucky enough to be the first collector on Super Rare. So there was an artist named Robbie Barrett who was doing this amazing early AI artwork, and I really wanted to collect it, and I had been a beta tester for Super Rare, and I said, well, you know, why don't I become your first collector, and we'll get Robbie on as your first artist. This led to a collaboration that's become sort of famous in crypto art history, where I was invited to go to London to present on, or to moderate 2 panels on NFTs and blockchain and art, still not really calling them NFTs at this point. And I went and talked to Robbie and Super Rare, and I said, look, I can give away something in the goodie bag at this Christie's event to all these traditional art collectors. They're going to have no idea what I'm talking about. What if we gave away 300 NFTs, you know, in paper wallet format in these cards, so that they can actually understand what NFTs are? And they both agreed. So we had this panel with other, you know, early luminaries. This is Masha from Ascribe, which is another very early NFT platform, John Zettler from Rare Art Labs, Matt from CryptoPunks, and Judy from Data NYC. And here we are at this event in front of traditional art collectors, trying to explain to them, and again, we all take it for granted now that people understand like that collecting digital art makes sense and that NFTs make sense. But these traditional art collectors were looking at us like yawning and crossing their eyes, like, who let these people in? No one wants to collect digital art, never mind this weird blockchain stuff, right? So I famously gave away 300 NFTs at this event, and I begged people, do not throw them away. If you don't want them, I'll buy them back from you, even though I gave it to you. And as the story goes, about 90% of them, 95% of them just ended up in the trash. But when people do find them, they sell for up to $1 million each now. So in this very short span from 2018 to around 2021, it went from people having no idea what we were talking about to people digging through their trash trying to figure out where these early NFTs were. And this is just to say that mostly what people from the art world were looking at in 2018 wasn't digital art and collecting digital art. This was a second panel I ran where they were trying to figure out just how to use the blockchain to track physical artworks like paintings and things like that. So it really, this interest in digital art, although it was part of that earlier panel, you know, wasn't the part that was drawing in the traditional art world at the time. So to speed it up a little bit, you know, I generally describe what happened in those early years in terms of Rare A Art festivals, right? So you remember that first Rare A Art festival was Rare AF festival was sort of the birth of crypto art, in that everybody that was working independently all came together physically for the first time, all from around the world. Well, I like to say in Rare AF 2, the second year, you know, we were wondering, will there be enough collectors? So crypto art, much like today, we see sort of a bear market. It's always gone up and down based on the cryptocurrency cycles. When people are doing really well in cryptocurrency, we see people buying more NFTs. When it goes down, we see less people buying NFTs. So in 2019, like today, we had very much like a bear market. And instead of hundreds of people showing up and being super excited, only a couple dozen people showed up, like the real diehards, right? The people that were like true believers. But we were asking, like, is this even going to be a thing next year in 2020, right? Like, much like today, maybe you might be asking yourself, like, are NFTs dead, right? So we were wondering, before the explosion ever happened, are we going to get enough collectors? And sure enough, some early collectors, you know, that had the vision, you know, started to gather and collect in 2019 and really helped us move forward. But then the question became in 2020, okay, we've got some collectors, we've got artists. You know, Rare AF 1, the real question was, like, can we even find artists? So we got artists, we got collectors, and then the question became, yeah, people are going to collect once, like they'll buy a work once, but there's not really a secondary market. You don't really have an art market, a new art market, until you have a secondary market. And that's when we, you know, so that was sort of the question of 2020. And through 2020, we start to see people becoming interested in paying more to buy particular works because they were early, or they were more limited, or they just really liked them and that artist wasn't making as much. But it's not really until the Beeple sale at Christie's in 2021, the $69 million sale, that the whole world starts to take interest, right? So what started out as sort of this altruistic, small group of tech nerds and artists who were trying to build a new, better, healthier art world pretty quickly gets turned upside down and explodes when the Beeple sale happens, because now it's in the news all around the world. Everyone's interested because, wow, $69 million, right? And that was never really our goal. Like, it starts to look a lot like the old art world. Here we have a 200-year-old auction house selling a work by a white male artist for $69 million. That's a headline that could have been seen in the traditional art world for for the last 2 decades, right? So it doesn't, unfortunately, this is the introduction for most people to NFTs, and it's nothing like what we were trying to build, but it does, we are grateful in that it does bring the world's attention. It's just, we're trying to build something altruistic, and like where artists can make more money and anyone can participate regardless of skill, and like this kind of sends the wrong message and becomes the intro for a lot of people. But it does help us take it mainstream, and you see things like Saturday Night Live and Ellen, and like everyone on the mainstream news channels are talking about NFTs, which to those of us that were in early is sort of mind-blowing, right? We're like, this weird nerdy hobby that we had that we thought was going to grow slowly is now like this massive thing that's growing like almost arguably too fast. Similarly, we start to see, so this is artist Memo Aitken, who's a friend of mine, who wrote sort of a scathing report about how bad NFTs were for the environment, and a lot of which I'm grateful for, but a lot of environmentalists came, and it got so bad that some environmentalists were actually putting death threats on to some of the early NFT artists, and I felt like it wasn't fair. Often you had these artists from countries where, they maybe, never owned a car, and certainly never, flew anywhere, and had these super small, footprints on the world, and they go and make 1 or 2 NFTs, and there are a lot of people like coming after them. So what we saw was sort of a battle between early NFT creators and environmentalists, and being someone sort of in between, where I'm certainly care a ton about the planet, but I also care about finding a way to help artists make a living. I started Green NFTs, and it really became very quickly an initiative run by the entire community to say, rather than using all this energy to fight each other, let's try to find a way to make things better and grow awareness and, improve things. And that's right around the time when Hic et Nunc comes out, right? So it's kind of perfect timing. So I won't go into proof of work versus proof of stake, which is sort of a key ingredient on how efficient and energy efficient blockchains are, but it's important to know that Tezos has always been proof of stake, which is sort of the better, more environmentally friendly approach. And a lot of these digital artists that maybe weren't that interested, to be quite honest, in cryptocurrency, or didn't have that background, but were well-known digital artists, they had kind of stayed away up until this point. But they saw that these early crypto artists who maybe were self-taught, but like knew about blockchain, were starting to get attention. And Hic et Nunc became sort of their opportunity to come in, because they're like, okay, now it's environmentally friendly. I understand it. It's clear that it's starting to become big, because these artists that were relatively unknown are starting to get a reputation. So we see sort of a renaissance in generative art and digital art, Hic et Nunc, with many big names coming in early on, but also because the gas fees are much lower. People who just straight up couldn't afford to participate on Ethereum because the minting fees were too high, are now able to participate through things like Hic et Nunc, and it really flourishes and kind of brings the community spirit back to cryptocurrency, or to crypto art. And all along the way, you still see it every day today. People talk about how NFTs are dead, but even at the high points, there's always been people that hate NFTs and that will write about NFTs are dead and NFTs are dead and the bubble's gonna burst. And it's because people are afraid of change and people are afraid of technology. So, it's just to say, take that stuff with a grain of salt. This movement will always be around as long as people care enough to want to contribute to it and keep it moving, and to try to help it grow and evolve. So other, trends real quick that happened, as we get closer to today, I don't really focus as much because many of you probably lived through these parts. So it's not really history. It's a little bit more contemporary, but we do see a shift towards generative art, which is exciting for folks like me. Even before I was into NFTs, I've been writing about and creating generative art for about 20 years, and always thought the two should blend together. So platforms like art blocks really kind of seamlessly bring together generative art and NFTs, and we sort of see generative art take off. And of course, PFP mania. Most people think PFPs are sort of passe right now, but for a while, NFTs and PFPs pretty much meant the same thing. And it's around this time that we start asking ourselves on the art side, like, have things maybe grown too fast, right? Where we're kind of losing our core principles. This is a graph that I sort of made, half-heartedly as a joke one day, but it became pretty popular. And I do think there's something to it, which is that we see these boom-bust cycles, right? Where there's 2018, there was this big hype cycle, but prior to that, things like CryptoPunks and Rare Pepe, they're actually made when no one cares about, in the bear market, when no one's buying and selling and no one cares about the whole NFT stuff. And then these big movements come in, and you actually see, I would argue, less innovation and less interesting art. And then when the bear markets come in, you see innovation again, and things like, super rare, known origin, rareable. And then the hype train comes in, and you see famous people, trying to buy PFPs and stuff like that, and it goes down. And then when it goes down, you see again more innovation come in. So, it can feel tough when sales aren't really that high, but often that's when the core community gets built. So if you stick around long enough, these boom bust cycles, come and go, regardless of which version you like. Just wait long enough and it'll change. So yeah, this is just a tweet that I wrote that I like to reference because it helps me explain why I think this stuff is important, right? So our generation's culture is largely digital. NFTs let us preserve and collect that history the way that previous generations did with analog history. It sometimes looks clunky because the solutions aren't perfect, and they're still not. And we're in a transitional period, but the train has left the station, meaning there's a lot at stake, right? We need something like NFTs because so much of our culture is digital now, and we've done such a poor job already of documenting it and finding a way to make it, ownable so that we feel like we're stewards and we're on the hook to take care of it and to make sure that we can track the provenance is pretty important. So this is just a lot of times folks in the residency are new to the space and they struggle trying to meet new people or make it as artists. And I say, well, instead of coming in and asking the question like, how come I'm not selling? How do I extract value from this community? Ask yourself, what can I contribute to the community? So John F. Kennedy had this famous thing, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And it's, I'm partially joking, but partially being honest, the people who succeed in this community are the people that come in with a mental attitude of how do I contribute? How do I help? How do I support other artists? Not necessarily with money, but just by drawing attention to their work and uplifting them. And if you come in with an attitude of how can I help instead of how can I take, you tend to do a lot better. Other advice, patience and humility. A lot of times people assume oh, well, yeah, it must be great to be X copy because he's always been famous and makes millions of dollars, right? Or, there's no room for me, but people like Sarah Zucker, they do really well, but, new people don't do well. Well, I was here when these people were new. I bought Xcopy's first token for $1. So yeah, this idea that he was just born somehow a superstar, he was making NFTs and making work before NFTs as a digital artist for a long time, and it takes patience, right? Similarly, Sarah Zucker's work sat on Super Rare. A few people bought a couple pieces, but it was just sitting there through most of 2019. And when I finally made a sale, I went in and bought a bunch of it, and I was like, you guys are all crazy for not having collected this, right? It took her being herself and being patient and being an active part of the community, and now she's one of the leaders in the entire space, in my opinion, and always was an amazing artist, right? So if you're thinking you're going to come in and mint a work and become famous and that's the path, that's not the way it works, right? You have to come and contribute and be part of the community and put your time in, and over time, if you build that connections with all those people, maybe it will kind of grow for you. And then the last, two things real quick. for a while there, people that these new world art advisors who were more really just like cryptocurrency nerds were telling artists like, you're making too much work, you're making too much work, because they were worried that it was going to like cheapen the value of the art that they bought or the NFTs that they bought. Tell them to go to hell. I have a whole article that I can explain. There's no relationship like between artists making too much work or flooding their own market. If you're an artist, you know the only way to get better is by spending more time making work, right? And then in the article, it shows, the three top artists, selling artists from the contemporary, or from the, yeah, I guess you could still argue contemporary art world in general. Every year at auction are Van Gogh, Andy Warhol, and Pablo Picasso, and all of them were super prolific in their own way in their lifetime, right? So this idea that you can make too much work is just, it's silly. Your work's only going to get better by making more work. And then lastly, just a reminder to folks to remember that this is just my perspective. There are lots of people that live through this too and have other perspectives. There's a great timeline by Martin Lucas Ostachowski that I recommend folks check out on the history of crypto art. It gives a different perspective than me, and you can certainly find different perspectives from the both of us. But hopefully, hearing from someone who was here for at least from 2017 on, and fairly integral to popularizing NFTs in 2018, gives you at least one first-hand perspective. So with that, I am going to stop and happy to open up for any questions. I should probably stop sharing my screen. And yeah, I think I could probably go for 15 minutes or so if there are questions. And if not, that's fine too. I'm always happy to give folks time back. I know it's a lot to go through the presentation and the intros, but definitely open to answer any questions folks might have. Yeah, sure. Go for it, Emily.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you think this space is going to evolve in the next 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, it's up to you guys, and that's not a cop-out. So it's literally up to the new fresh blood that comes in. Where they want to take it and where they ultimately do take it, right? It's always been a ground up sort of community, grassroots driven thing. Periodically, companies or opportunists will come in when they see there's money sloshing around, but they only ever stay for like 6 months to a year to get their money, and then they leave. So like where this goes in terms of whether or not it actually evolves into something healthy has to do with folks like you that are coming in that will help define the direction that it goes. My hope is that it continues to become more and more global. I hope that we actually don't get rid of the financial component, but that we de-emphasize the massive sums, and that it moves maybe to, instead of artist sells a work and hopes that it sells to one person for $100,000, that 100,000 people give the equivalent to what's almost like a tip to show that artist that they appreciate that work. That makes it so that more collectors can afford to participate, more artists can afford to be supported, and through that support, artists are able to continue to make the work that makes our life better every day when we wake up, and our lives are full with more art. But I'm famously maybe Pollyanna-ish in my view or hope for where things go. But good people push to build a good environment, and I think we have a lot of good people here, not just in this cohort, but a lot of new good people have joined over the last year or two, so it's up to them. Let's see, any other, I see I have a question as well, I too. Okay, let's go, Andrea.
Well, Jason, thank you for the amazing presentation and the history. Well, I think I speak on behalf of everyone. That was amazing to hear, especially from you, first points of view. And hearing your fairly optimistic and Pollyanna view, I'm kind of surprised to hear your frustration on the fractionalization parts of the traditional world. Just this weekend, I was personally curious about this very topic and did an extensive research and found people doing found the ArtFi, that's the one, a Dubai project to store the works and also display them as a museum while giving people the fractional investment opportunity. What do you think about stuff like that happening? Do you think it's really possible to make it where the digital arts and traditional world merges and everyone benefits?
So with digital art, I'm a little bit more okay with it because we can all see, the digital art was made often natively digital, and I'm not a believer that unless it was the intention of the artist that I need a big fancy frame on the wall or this, that, and the other. So digital art fractionally shared, we can all experience that piece of digital art sort of in an equal way. But with physical paintings, what I've seen, we already have a problem with the commercialization. Oh, let me do a quick stop here. We take a lot of crap in the NFT world from the traditional art world for commercializing art, but the traditional art world has done it, perfected it long before we got here, right? So art collectors often buy these expensive and important artworks and shove them into free ports where they're just financial assets and no one can see them. That was already a thing. And when we fractionalize ownership for physical artworks like that, it just increases sort of this desire to put that physical artwork somewhere where it can't get damaged, because if it does, you're now going to have 100,000 owners who are going to be really pissed off, right? And unlike digital art, that physical artwork is in a closet now or maybe on public display, but it's not somewhere where all the owners can actually see it or experience it in the way it was intended, right? Whereas with digital art, I'm a little bit more okay with it. So yeah, co-ownership as like a healthy co-op style kind of thing, and a way to make everyone to be able to participate, I'm down with. But when it starts to remove the art component of art, I get a little nervous. And thank you for the positive feedback as well. I want to make sure that I move on so that I catch all the questions. Let's see, we've got Rebecca or Numinal.
Yes. Thank you so much. I'll just jump right to the question. I'm curious what you think about you continuing to use the term NFTs moving forward. There's been a lot of different terms that you've used in the past. My background is in academic analytic philosophy, and so I care a lot about definitions, and I've had some frustrating conversations with people about the use of the term NFT. So curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I love how obnoxious it was when it came out. It was really important because it pissed off all the right people. It pissed off the traditional art world because they were like, actually, I've been into digital art for like decades and there's nothing new here. And the truth is, there's actually a shitload of new stuff here, right? And I'm really glad, even though I was lucky enough to have traditional art world training, I'm glad that it pissed off all the right people because they did build a giant gated community that most people weren't able to participate with. And this was an attempt to break that. And NFT seemed to really piss them off rather than calling it digital art. So I was glad that it did that. And I'm glad that it's different than crypto art, because crypto art is something a bit more altruistic and less commercial than NFTs. And that's why I call this the history of crypto art. And I'm very protective of what crypto art's intentions were and, and what it is relative to what NFTs are. And NFTs obviously also go beyond just art. So I like, I know we saw things like ICOs became a bad word in the blockchain world and it disappeared. And now we use DeFi, even though it's essentially the same thing. So there may be a rebrand, but I'm sort of a fan of terms that make people bristle or cause controversy, and so in a way, I kind of hope the awkward acronym sticks around and forces further conversation, because if I'm a marketing guy, and if you name something too well, it just easily kind of like greases the wheels into everyone's vocabulary and no one complains about it. I think we need something that kind of perpetually causes people to rethink what it is we actually are dealing with here. Let's see. Next question. Question from, I think it was Icasis.
Yeah, it's me, Ivan. Ivan.
Ivan.
I wanted to ask you. There are two questions, but they are really quick. One is, how do you feel about, in your experience, how do you feel about the combination of physical NFTs with the digital? An example, like if I draw something hand drawn and then I can it, and then when you have the physical piece, you add some content like augmented reality or something like that. And I try to make that kind of stuff, but I always struggle with the idea of what happens after on the secondary sales, because it's the first person can get a physical, but how do you can't control when there's a secondary sale. Is that handled? And the other one is about style, because I've been working hard and the time I have in the NFT space on making my work to be recognizable from without seeing my name. Is that something that you think is important, like, or that doesn't matter to you?
Yeah, so great questions. I'm going to give an honest answer that won't be very satisfying to the first question, and then I'll try to remember the second question is around style. So this is an important point to remind people that, like, I don't speak for the entire community. I have my own individual, like, preferences and things like that, right? And for me, I love physical art. Like, that's what I grew up around. But NFTs and crypto art always made more sense to me as a digital thing. There has to be some sort of meaningful digital component to it for me to want to collect. And I really love the interplay between physical art and digital art, but I like when it's done meaningfully. And what I saw when NFTs started to make a lot of money, a whole lot, and I'm sympathetic, but a whole lot of my physical art world friends were like, well, I'm just going to take pictures of my drawings or my paintings and try to sell them as NFTs. And I'm like, well, you haven't really engaged digitally in any way that's interesting at all. Why not just sell your painting? Like, this isn't solving any problem for you, and it's not doing anything artistically, right? And I'm not saying that's what you said you're doing, but I'm just sharing, like, my history and bias around, like, I have a preference that if someone's going to engage with digital art, that they do it meaningfully. And then there's also analog artists that are like, ooh, okay, well, I hear that, so I'm going to do the minimum amount needed to do, like, a quick digital animation of my physical work or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, still not really there, right? Like, it's almost like if you spent your entire life becoming a virtuoso saxophone player, and then 1 year guitar became super, super famous, and you're like, well, I want to be famous. I'm going to play, guitar instead of saxophone now. It's like, well, I kind of think you should, or just engage on a surface level, right? I kind of think you should stick to the thing you've always loved, or engage meaningfully and curiously. But, like, I don't know, everyone can kind of tell when you just slap, like, a digital part on there that's, like, not really, like, part of your artistic process. So be curious and engage deeply. I'm sure you are. And, it's not meant to be aimed at you. It's just, having been here 5 years, dealt with millions and millions of artists that, or maybe not millions, but lots and lots of artists that kind of do fall into that camp, where it's like they make amazing physical, paintings or sculptures, and then they, like, throw on some tacky digital component and don't really engage with digital in a meaningful way because they're hoping someone will buy their stuff. And then your second question around style. Because I come from an artist background where I am an artist, I actually worry. Again, I'm different from most people, and we have to remember that. I worry that people repeat over and over again because they want people to see their style. When the whole point of art, the reason, like, it's exciting to me as an artist and an artist who loves other artists, is the voyage and the journey and the transformation. And I think people worry too much about being consistent. And when I see someone being consistent, and I think they're a great artist, I'm almost certain they're holding back on the creative side, which is, like, the entire point of all of this, right? Is for us to explore ourselves and our creative side. So, like, from a commercial perspective, yeah, probably consistency and style helps sell. From, like, hey, at the end of the day, like, we want to continue to engage with art as artists because it's who we are. I think style always should come second to artistic exploration when you can. Easier said than done. Like some days it's like, yeah, I got to eat, Jason, and like if I'm when I make these, they sell, so maybe there's a balance there. I'm gonna go to next question. Let's see, we've got Sarah Grayson.
Hi, Jason. Yeah, just a real quick one. I've really loved this whole session, so thank you so much. You have kept me awake. It's now 3:45 in the morning, so thank you.
Wow.
Yeah, I really loved the question there about the physical and digital, and I really loved your answer to the style, because what we've really loved about jumping into the object I think it was last July, is we've really been able to evolve artistically, and that's kind of one of the big reasons why we're so excited to be in the program, the residency. But one question, it's not as esoteric as some of the others, but I've jumped into your club NFT whilst you were presenting, and I've had a good look around. Really excited to see that you've got a tweet that says 200 gigabytes of art are backed up using your tool. And you probably know that, one of the big issues for us as filmmakers back in the early days of 2020 and 21 was the file size limitation. And it's just great to see that you've got this ability to back up that amount of data. I just wondered, is there a maximum ceiling on the amount of NFTs we can back up using your tool? And thanks for everything.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. Yeah, currently there is no maximum. We have like any data distribution, we have one or two collectors that have really pushed us to the limit in terms of like their collection size, but we've been able to back them up. And generally, most people's collections are fairly manageable. Typically what happens is, as you probably know, if you're doing large video, files and things like that, you're really never going to see that stuff on the blockchain. In a best case scenario, it's on a platform where they're using IPFS, so they're permanently linking from the token with a hash that proves that the content will never change. And through IPFS, you can keep it pinned and store it in multiple places. So the shorter answer is like currently no limit. We are at a stage, a year and a half in as a company, where we've given away free backups for a year and a half now, and in about 2 weeks we're going to have to switch in order to exist and survive, and start charging pretty reasonable monthly fee. But I know reasonable to me may not be reasonable to others. So, and I care about NFTs first and foremost. So I do encourage folks to like go now, like in between now and the next 2 weeks. If you don't have what will probably be 15 or 16 bucks to spend to get a membership for a month and download in the future, do go now and back up your collection, please, for free, and get the files locally. It's designed from the ground up. Hopefully you can tell from my presentation, I truly care about the core Web3 and crypto principles. Our entire solution is designed so that even if we go out of business, you don't need us to exist. You're going to have a local copy of all files in your collection so that you can restore them to IPFS later. If you're a nerd like me and you want to learn more about IPFS, right-click Save is a great publication to go read about art and artists, but we also have stuff on there about how to understand how your NFTs are constructed, and how to back them up. And yeah, IPFS is actually super cool topic if you're nerdy at all. For whatever reason, everyone's obsessed with the blockchain. I think it's because, the cryptocurrency background, and I get beat up for saying this sometimes, but I think IPFS is just as important and exciting to digital artists as blockchain, because it actually proves that the content that you created when you made your NFT is that content, and that it can't ever change by having that unique hash. And it makes it so that your collectors can download and back up the files and always reload it if the marketplace ever goes out of business, right? So they can have like a preservation of the work. So if you're not familiar with interplanetary file system or IPFS, and you're making NFTs and you're curious, like that's a good thing to go and learn about. All right. Let's see. How do I feel about Arweave in the context of NFT storage? that's an interesting one to end on. But I'll do my best on this one. I think Arweave is an interesting storage platform, but don't like it as a replacement for IPFS, right? So the problem with Arweave, in my opinion, is it's essentially a second blockchain, and it has its own tokenomics incentive system, which, I'm not against tokenomics incentive systems, but I don't want to have another blockchain and another incentive system have to survive for my art not to break. And Arweave, it essentially requires that Arweave succeed as a tokenomic system, and that the Arweave blockchain succeed if a work is minted at the core using Arweave. What I would much rather see, and I know this is a nerdy tech way to end the call, but I would much rather see people minting NFTs using IPFS, and then if you love Arweave, once you mint it with IPFS, you can use Arweave as one of many ways to store and back things up, right? So you can still use Arweave storage if you mint with IPFS, but you could also then burn it to a DVD or put it on a hard drive or put it in the cloud, and then you have redundancy across multiple different areas. So sometimes people are like, well, why do you hate Arweave? I don't hate Arweave. I just don't want NFTs to be minted using Arweave, because then you're stuck with Arweave. If you mint with IPFS, you can use anything, including Arweave, as a backup method, right? So that's sort of a nerdy but important distinction there. And I think with that, I'm going to say thank you to everybody. Please, if you have other questions, follow me at Artnome on Twitter. I'm not really good on like Discord and Telegram and all the other stuff, but I'm on Twitter way too often. So if you have a question for me, I try really, really hard to respond to anything that anyone in the entire community has to ask. I'm at Artnome on Twitter, and I'll do my best to try to follow. I usually try to follow everyone in the cohort as well, because I really do enjoy meeting you all and seeing your work and trying to get to know you. And always want to thank Nicole and Boria for creating the Digital Artist Residency. Someone asked earlier what I think the future of this space is going to be like. Well, I had already been here a while, I think. Maybe not, I should be careful, when Nicole came along. But someone like Nicole carries this, and Boria carry this community forward so far by their actions in creating things like this. So please, if you get to benefit from something like the Digital Artist Residency, do think about how you can help others and pay it back, right? The reason I'm here is because those people I told you about, Joe Looney, Bea, Matt and John, who invented CryptoPunks, they were all patient enough with me in 2017, 2018, so I pay it back by doing things like this, right? And that's how Mikkel and Boria pay it back. So please do think in terms of what you can do to help the community move in a positive direction as a way to show gratitude for what people here are trying to help you with. And that's probably a good way to end it, and enjoy the rest of the residency. Take care, everybody.